2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
So Roger, you have this really interesting background where you trained to become a coach, but you actually went into teaching and then returned to coaching. So tell us about that arc and that journey and how you made that progression.
Yeah, so when I made the decision to pursue a master's in psychology, which was focused in executive coaching, I actually didn't even know what coaching was at the time. The driver for that was working with math students prior to that and just falling in love with the process of unleashing their confidence on a subject that they felt they were not meant for, they were not born for. And in the process of doing that, I learned that what math students needed help with was not the actual math, but it was more the confidence, breaking down limiting beliefs, all those kinds of things. And once you did that, get out of their way. Like the math takes care of itself. It's actually not that hard once you remove those barriers.
Right.
And so I fell so in love with that process, and I was only doing that maybe 6 to 10 hours a week after my daytime, like my day job.
Okay.
And so
what was the day job at the time?
So I was a national account salesperson. My account was actually Anheuser-Busch.
Okay.
We had a special beer cooler that brought beer down like 10 degrees below its freezing point, believe it or not. And then, I got to go to all these great events with them because this was like a premier product for them that they could bring into all of their clients.
Yeah.
And then after doing that by day, I would go work with these students at a learning center that was about 5 minutes away from my apartment.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with those like 6 to 10 hours a week. And at some point, it hit me like there's something out there that I think I could be better at than what I'm doing right now. It's not that I wasn't enjoying what I was doing or anything like that. I worked for great people.
Yeah.
So I know some people say like, screw corporate, I'm out of there. I didn't feel that way either.
Yeah.
So I didn't really agree with that movement either,
Right.
what people were saying there.
Right.
I go, actually I worked for great people who, many of them were old enough to be my parents. And they, really took me under their wing and helped me out a lot. But then something about these 6 to 10 hours, I realized I'm doing something special here. I was getting a lot of great feedback from experienced teachers. Veteran teachers were telling me, this is awesome what you do with these students.
Yeah.
And the parents are requesting you, like they want you, not someone else to work with their kids.
Right.
So from there, I just made this decision that, I think I need to explore this. And I decided to take this leap and begin my first reinvention. And I didn't call it a reinvention then, but I knew that I needed to take this leap and figure it out. And I knew that I needed to learn more about the science of helping people break through and, unleash what their potential is. And that's where I found this master's in psychology. I actually thought it was going to be a master's in education.
Right.
But I figured that makes sense. If I want
that's
to
what you were doing.
Right, I'm teaching people, so I think it should be in the School of Education somewhere.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. It wasn't there. I looked through all those programs and I go, none of this looks like a recipe for helping someone grow.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, here's how you teach math. I already know that part. That's not so hard. The hard part is breaking through. So as I continued to look, I looked into the School of Psychology and some of the Masters in Psychology programs, and I found this one called Executive Coaching. I'm like, well, these are not executives, but this coaching thing sounds interesting. I read through, and when I saw the curriculum, I go, that's a recipe for growing humans. And so I enrolled and got into it. And since I needed a place to practice, I was already tutoring math students. So I figured this is a great way to practice coaching. While I'm learning about it, I'll just practice on my math students.
100%. So how hard is it to coach, and I'll be curious to hear from you, which are tougher. Is it harder coaching middle schoolers and high schoolers, or is it harder coaching adults?
Middle schoolers and high schoolers, for sure.
Okay, I was expecting you to say adults.
No, adults are easier. And the reason is because one of the underlying assumptions of all coaching is that the client wants to be there.
Yes.
And when you're working with students, you're already in an environment where they didn't necessarily sign up for this on their own. This is, mandated. They have to be there.
Yeah.
So you have to break through that first in order to really unleash the power of coaching with them. So I had to create an environment that they wanted to come to, a classroom that they wanted to be a part of, even though they felt math is not my subject.
Right.
So that's what you're up against with adults. They're paying me to be. So obviously you must want this on some level. I don't have to convince you. Exactly. I don't have to convince them. So I would say working with coaching high school and middle school students was a lot more difficult.
Okay. When you described what you do a phrase that really stood out to me was School of Reinvention. And I think you said in the video by accident, 40 is the new 60, but meant it as 60 is the new 40. But tell us a little bit about how you work with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, many of whom are displaced out of the roles that they're in, due to whatever set of modern economic phenomena we all live with. How do you help them find the next thing and find their source of reinvention?
So it's interesting. You mentioned the 40 to new 60. That was actually intentional.
Okay.
Because I believe there's an opportunity to make that stage of life so exciting that someone in their 40s is going to want to do that. I'm like, oh, I wish I was 60. Like, I want to create that. And so I actually flipped that on purpose because I go, that's what I want to do. If I could only say it in a few words, I would say 40 is the new 60 is what I'm trying to create, not the other way around where you want to look at it the other way. So, but, in terms of your question and how do I help them do something like that? Well, first I have to acknowledge some of the barriers and some of the challenges. I'm learning so much about age discrimination that they're facing, or layoffs. And during COVID, this was only accelerated, and because it was an opportunity, unfortunately, people saw it as an opportunity to lay off people who were older. And I was caught up in one of those layoffs, and when I looked at all the people around me, they were all old enough to be my parents. And I'm like, this doesn't seem like just a random coincidence. This almost seems by design. And so between that or forced early retirement, people are finding themselves in this position at that age in their 60s where they are, what do I do now? And the question that they asked was, what now? Or what's next? These are the most common questions I was getting from this group. And so a lot of it is really, one, helping them understand what they already have within them. Because a lot of times I found that people were kind of just, well, I did this work and that was it. And I wasn't even passionate about it. So did it count for anything? And my answer to that is absolutely it counted for so much. You just haven't mined for the right things. You haven't extracted the right value from that work, but it's there. The good news is that, don't worry, even if you didn't find it yet, it hasn't disappeared, didn't go away. It's just under a few layers. We just got to get it out of there. Once we get it out of there, you can take that and repurpose that to help launch a new chapter, something completely different. We look at your old work in a very different way. We don't look at it as, well, I've been doing marketing for the last 20 years. That's cool. You don't have to do marketing anyway. There are a lot of other things you got from that. And then I want to help you reframe that work.
So for our listeners who are interested in coaching, one of the things that they struggle to do is understand the concrete impact of a coach, right? So give us an example of someone that you worked with who was in this situation, right? Laid off from a job, had spent a bunch of years doing this one thing. How do you help them sort of unpack or mine, as you said, what was useful about that and how they recombine that with, perhaps an area that they're passionate about or interested in to sort of retool for the next phase of their career?
So one particular client I'm thinking about, when we started this process, I asked for a lot of stories about her career. I wanted to hear some of the highlights. I'm like, go back as far as you want, whatever.
And you're trying to get at the most enjoyable moments there, what gave her pleasure, what made her really excited and interested about that role.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus, I also figured these are probably going to be things that she remembered,
right?
Because they stood out for whatever reason. But I also spent time what were some of your biggest challenges? Some of those moments where you're like, wow, that was really tough. I struggled a lot.
Yeah.
Even if it didn't end positively. Tell me about that. And what I'm doing is I'm listening for patterns. I'm listening for keywords, places where she might emphasize something but not even realize she's emphasizing it, words she uses a lot, things like that, parts of the story that she might go back to a lot.
Right.
And I'm trying to help her hear what she is not hearing herself. Right. And this is perhaps one of the most important things I do as a coach. And when I teach coaching, or I used to teach coaching at IBM, this is what I would teach a lot. You have to listen for what they can't hear. They may actually say it. I mean, it might sound so obvious, but not to them. And so we need to be listening for that. When we find that, we can grab on things and start digging a little deeper. Tell me more about that. Right. I noticed you sat up a little bit more when you said that part of the story. Or I noticed you smiled. It just popped on your face, and it didn't look like even subtle. Like it was just like, and I want to like hear more about that.
Yeah.
And I don't, say like, tell me what was so good about that. No, just tell me more. And then it's like, wow, gosh, that was a really interesting day because, and then we're hearing that. And I'm really just trying to understand, like, what was it about what were some of like the things about the job, the experience, maybe the ways that she behaved, things she did. And if I can extract those and separate them from the profession or the function, like marketing, accounting, whatever it might be, then we can take those and like, where else could we experience that? Like, what other places could you experience something like that? That's the starting part. It's really like mining for all of those like really magical moments in your past. And then from there, we've got something we can move forward with. Plus, the person's in a much better state when you're talking about even the challenges, because then it's like we can find the things to be proud of.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. One of the questions that I feel comes up a lot in conversations with coaches is this concept of coachable clients, right? Like, when are clients ready, in a sense, to receive coaching? How do you ascertain that? Sometimes they don't even know if they're ready. How do you ascertain that?
There's a couple of things that I do. The first is I've learned not to sell too hard. Because I've noticed that I know if I sell too hard, and I don't mean like too aggressively, I just get too excited. If I get too excited, I might accidentally inspire or motivate that person to say, yeah, maybe I should do some coaching.
Right. It's almost as though you're excited for them.
Exactly.
And
it
to
spills
build
up.
that excitement themselves.
And it's contagious, right? When we're around excited people who are excited, we feel that too for the moment. But then it's time to sit down and have sessions, and all of a sudden you need to have that excitement. I can't continue to bring that every moment. And that's when I've learned, one, to be very careful how I talk about it. Two, once we're in the sessions, one client I'm thinking about, it's many years ago, after 2 or 3, really I noticed it after the second, but I thought, let me give it 3 or 4 sessions. I just realized the work wasn't getting done. And I felt that, in the end, this person was just not ready to even embark on those on this new path or whatever it was. He was definitely upset or not satisfied with what he was doing, but at the same time, he was also apparently not unsatisfied enough to begin taking action. To begin taking that action, exactly. And I realized that a few sessions in, and we had to quote unquote break up, I guess, if you will. And so, and I explained it to him. I go, this is really not going anywhere, and it doesn't make any sense for you to pay me. We're basically just hanging out. And so this is just not worth it anymore for you. Like, it's, but I want to help you if at any point you find yourself ready. So that's another thing that I've noticed. I don't let it go past too many sessions, because I just want to make sure that at the end,
it's serving the client.
Exactly. And I'm not enjoying it either. So like, I'll be selfish here. I'm like, I'm just not having fun, and I'm doing this because I want to make an impact. So if it's not happening, it's not happening. So that's the other thing. But then there's this, I would say, like, so one, if I sell too hard, I can try to mitigate that a little bit up front. If someone's just not taking action at all, I realize maybe they're just not ready to, like, it's not bothering them enough to take action. But then there's the other case where someone always has like an excuse. Like, there's always an objection to why this can't work. Like, well, and with those situations, I always give the benefit of the doubt. I always think, let's see if I can break that down. So let me go and do some objection busting here. Let's go through and break it through as many as I can. But if it continues to happen and we're just never getting through it, right now, this is not the right thing. This is not the right solution. There might be something else. Maybe it's actually something working with a counselor or a therapist. Maybe there's something else. There's someone else, another professional that's more qualified. And then I'll refer.
So you raised a really interesting point, right? The distinction between coaching and therapy or counseling. Where do you draw that line? I think different coaches draw that line in different ways. Beyond the coaching tends to be forward-looking and sort of problem-solving oriented or goal-oriented, right? And therapy can often be somewhat backward-looking. Where do you draw that line?
I always keep it really simple. Coaching, looking forward. Everything else, looking backwards. And I feel I'm very strict about that, because I feel that I know that as coaches, we have a responsibility to not go backwards and be very careful with the clients and not to go backwards. And so for me is if we have to start digging into the past and all of that, and I recognize that, I always say, this is now within the realm of somebody else, another kind of expert, not what I do.
Yeah.
I'm here to help you look forward. You have to already be at a point where you've decided I'm ready to begin moving forward, and I'm going to help you accelerate that path forward.
Yeah.
But if we have to go backwards too much, I mean, it's different. If you're going backwards a few months, that's not so bad. But if we're going way back, I'm not qualified.
Yeah.
So I will not help you here. And some people are like, no, let's keep this going. I love the, the chemistry we have. I feel so comfortable and there's a lot of trust. And I go, I hear you, but trust me, this is not going to end well because I'm just not qualified to do that. I may have some understanding of that because I have a master's in psychology, but it does not qualify me to do that work. I don't practice this.
Yeah.
And so I have to be very clear. Like, I think that now you might want to work with both of us.
Sure.
That's an alternative. That's something that could work, but I cannot address the backward-looking issues. I address the forward-looking issues.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things you talked about in your work with your math students was convincing them of getting to good enough instead of perfect, right? There's so many people in so many different contexts who hesitate to do something because they don't feel they can be perfect at it. And really, most things in life require a level of mastery, but not perfection. Mm-hmm. Tell us about how you convince clients of that distinction. There are different ways to do it, especially with adults versus students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I found the ways are not that different.
Okay.
They're not that different because I talk actually to both of them. I talk a lot about the neuroscience and the science of learning.
Yeah.
And I talk about the science of mastery. And this is something that I studied a lot. And I actually teach them both the same exact stuff. Like, I don't say that there's a version for students or a version for... So I actually treat it the same.
Yeah.
And what I talk about is you have to make a decision how good you want to be at something.
Right.
You don't have to, by default, be great at everything that you do. And I get it. Many of us have been brought up to believe that.
Yeah.
That everything has to be an A because that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in reality, in life, we are an A in a few things, a B in a few, a C and D in others. And that's cool. And then plenty of things we're an F in. Right. And that is ultimately how life works out. But I get it. When you're a student, there's a lot of pressure, parents, the school, teacher system. So I'm not going to go and bash all of that. And same for adults. Like, I'm not going to go against all that. But we still have responsibility for how we approach things. And I promise you, if you approach it in a way where you are okay with setting a different target, capable of being good at something, being good enough at something, being great is just a different level. And that's going to require another set of steps and a commitment.
Yeah.
One example I always use, and this is the same for students and for adults, but I love the student one because I always think of one particular student who I had this conversation with.
Okay.
And she said, I just feel like I'm never going to be good as this other girl in class.
Right.
And I would ask her, how much time do you spend on your math every day? Mm-hmm. And she goes, well, and I knew the answer to this because I knew how much time she spent in ballet every afternoon.
Right.
Between getting ready for it, going all the way to the class, getting back. By the time she sat down to do her homework, it was already 9 p.m.
Right.
So I knew that there wasn't a lot of time for math. And basically she, said, just maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour, something like that. Hmm. Well, that student spends a lot more time on math. I know this, it's not a secret that she's really into it and all of that. Yeah. You're really into dance. Yeah. You are an A student in dance because this is your jam. This is what you do. Yeah. It's where you spend most of the time. And so I use this as an example to understand, like, this is how you learn to set your expectations.
It's your relative prioritization in the end.
And that's going to reflect your performance in all of these things. So you can be very proud of a B, like super proud of a B. I'm super proud of you hitting Bs because that shows me, like, wow, you have leveled up. By the way, you went beyond those D's and C's and you're at a B. That's insane. Yeah. Don't worry about what others are saying and all that. And I'll talk to your parents. That's why we have parent-teacher nights. Right. And with clients and adults, it's a little different. We don't have the parents part of it. But in a way, you are dealing with the parent inside of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Who is telling them, no, but I really have to be great. Yeah. Yeah. But when we talk about the science of learning and make it that objective, it starts to become, okay, I see what you're saying. I guess realistically, I can't do what it takes to master that. Yeah. And that's okay. Do you need to master that? Like, what level of mastery will make a difference?
Yeah.
And then you start to realize, but these two areas right here, you need to be a master of those.
Right.
Like that, you should obsess over being the A++ student on that.
Makes a ton of sense. So, Roger, we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Cool.
And I'm going to ask you to pretend that I am a new client of yours. And we're going to do sort of a mini, like, coach me session. Short,
Awesome.
not too long. So I've just come in. We're meeting for the first time. Over to you.
Awesome. So what brings you to coaching? What drove you to hire a coach?
I have just left my current role, and I am unsure what to do next.
Okay. How did you go about leaving that role?
I was let go.
Okay. And how did that make you? Well, how do you feel about the work you were doing prior to that, just before that, getting that news?
I didn't love it, you know. I don't think that I was necessarily a fit with the culture of the organization. I think that my own skills were not a perfect fit, or there just wasn't a structure within which I felt that I was unlocking them maximally. And I think it wasn't a culture where there was just too much of a care or attention being paid to sort of development of individuals. Everyone was sort of moving forward in some fashion. Yeah. And it was so much about the velocity of moving forward that the people were almost sort of incidental.
What were some of those skills that you felt were just not, I guess, being expanded or utilized as much as they could have?
Yeah, I think my role there was basically in sales and business development, and it was hard to be, we were an enterprise software company, so you were acting as a bridge effectively between a customer who may not be technical and a bunch of software engineers who were highly technical and a product that was highly technical. And so it was, in some ways an interpreter's job, but it was also a very iterative and kind of interactive role where you had to sort of communicate, but also enable both sides to understand each other and give both sides a little bit of what each wanted, right, effectively, because one person wanted to tackle a problem one way and, the other people might want to tackle it a very different way. And those weren't always the same.
What was a moment where you would say that skill really came out? Like it, maybe it didn't come out a lot, but one where it probably came out the most and you probably went home and thought, wow, I was awesome. Like I was pretty awesome that day.
There were a number of moments like that, and it was always when we were interacting with the people leading and driving a business, who had a very different view of their business and a very different set of performance objectives and market objectives and strategic objectives from the technical staff, who then, was seeing sort of a piece of the puzzle and much more involved in the micro, right? And I think being able to take that set of what are the business requirements and translate them into the technical piece of what we needed to do were like great moments,
Now that you find yourself in this spot, what's your number one question?
Where are my skills best utilized and where will I thrive?
Where are your skills best utilized and where will you thrive? And when you think about those questions, what are some of the answers that come to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I am a problem solver by nature. So I love thinking about the solutions to problems and trying them. But then when the solution becomes established, and we just have to deploy that solution 100 more times, I'm less interested in that piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more interested in the creation of the solution.
Yeah.
And making sure it works in the ideation
Mm-hmm.
than I am in the, okay, now we just got to deploy the solution a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. And do any places come to mind where you've seen, or perhaps colleagues or friends that you've seen doing this kind of work? Maybe you thought, that looks pretty cool.
Startups and entrepreneurship.
Startups. And where in that have you maybe even envisioned that you might offer them like your superpower? Where you could really flex your superpower the most?
I think either by partnering with someone who has an entrepreneurial idea or pursuing one myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you thought of any?
Yes, and that is Idea Mix, and we're here today.
I love it. I love it.
But that was amazing. Thank you for indulging me in the role play. But it's great for our listeners and viewers to have a sense of what your coaching style is like, and so it's kind of hugely useful to do these mini sessions. So
I love these demos. When I used to teach at IBM, we did this all the time, and I would always get asked, "Can you do one of your demos?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's go. Who do you want to throw at me?" And then it was always just a lot of fun because it gave us an opportunity to where I could run the session and zoom out to the class and look around at everybody and say, "Okay, what did I just do there?"
Yeah.
And all of that, and people start dissecting some of the things that I did,
Yeah.
whether I leaned in or if I leaned back, or where I was making eye contact. If it's a difficult question and I see the person struggling, I might look away for a moment, grab my glass of water, give that person space. These subtle little things. It's awesome to see how the class notices those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But then they become aware of how powerful that could be, and it seems, was that by accident? Did he get his water on purpose or by accident? Yeah. But it seems such like the timing was so good, but those are kinds of things that make sense. They create space for the person. And honestly, I learned this teaching math. This is where I learned all of these skills. When I go back and I'm running the lesson, I give people examples. Because they'll ask, where'd you learn how to do that? How'd you practice that?
Yeah.
I go to the classroom. When I worked with the middle school girls, I had the lowest track, or whatever you want to call them. And they were struggling the most.
Yeah.
So imagine all of these students that I have in the room are all thinking, I'm not a math person. So I'm up against an entire room of that.
There's very reluctant set of students.
Absolutely. Right. And the first thing I had to do was create a safe space. And I had to learn how to create a safe space so that someone could make a mistake, could say something that maybe they weren't sure about.
Yeah.
Just like a client. We have to make our clients feel comfortable saying something, because it will iterate on that. Yeah. But if I can't get you to say the first thing, we'll never get to version 17, which might be the one.
Totally.
Oh my gosh, I really like where it's gone, like how it's developed and evolved, but I got to get you to do version 1 first, or otherwise we don't get there.
Absolutely. Version 1 is always the first step.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Roger, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, I really enjoyed this, and great questions. They got me reflecting and thinking about my own journey.
Great. I'm glad. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please do review the show. We love hearing from you. So email us at info@theideamix.com or Instagram DM us. Our episode this week was produced by the incomparable Martin Milewski, with music by the awesome Nashville-based singer-songwriter Doug Allen. You can learn more about Doug at dougallenmusic.com.